Many institutional analysts who follow Tesla believe that gross margins will be flat or actually fall. But in fact, if cost of goods continues to fall at 3% per quarter, then we might actually see a rise in auto gross margins despite more price cuts. I've asked Jeff Lutz, a supply chain expert, to come in and explain what he thinks we can expect. We're going to look at how analysts typically get this wrong. We're going to look at the different ways to evaluate and why and what could actually happen. Glad to have you here, Jeff.
Yeah, this topic is near and dear, so let's go through it.
And you've got a lot to explain to people who are Tesla investors. They need to better understand this because we're going to show them what analysts are saying, and then how you can easily break apart what they're saying and how they might be wrong. So you posted this wonderful post on X, and you started off with this photo. This is Pavlov's dog. I think people understand what this is. Go ahead and explain this photo.
Yeah, this is the theory, and I'm being a little bit comical, but also a little bit descriptive of how I believe the situation is happening. So if you go with the upper left box, it's prior to any conditioning of, like, you put food in front of a dog and they salivate. And then the next, again, you're still prior to conditioning if you look at the upper right. And then there's this tuning fork or a bell maybe. And then there's no response from the dog. And then in the bottom left, if you take the tuning fork or a bell and you put it together with the food, you can get the dog to salivate. Remove the food and the bottom right, and you can make the dog salivate. This is Pavlov's dog theory. So I replaced the food with basically with margins and this whole pricing discussion. And basically, anytime that tuning fork is hit or the bell is hit, and there's a pricing change, immediately there's a set of analysts. Most analysts actually just immediately start salivating. And they, when I say salivate, it's in a bad way, like they're concerned, and they're conditioned. Any price change, they're conditioned. Any price reduction, they're conditioned, and they immediately run and just say, "This is terrible. This is going to happen for the rest of the Tesla's life and existence, all the way out to the 2030. This is the worst thing in the world. It's awful." Now, when you actually look at what happened over the past year, what happened last year, it's a tale of two halves, January to April, massive. These are price corrections. Those weren't price changes. We want to do wholesale corrections on our portfolio. No COGS program, no COGS effort is going to be able to keep up with 10, 12% reductions in pricing that was occurring January to April last year. But since that point in time, and basically the second half of last year, Tesla changed their approach. And Tesla went to an approach of smaller price changes, more regional, less frequency, and in the end, the aggregate price changes were very, very small. But like that Pavlov's dog experiment, literally every time that bell was hit, the analysts just had the reaction of, like, this is a problem, cut everything, this is terrible. Now, it took Tesla a couple of quarters to catch up from the corrections they did in the first half of last year. But what I was predicting is in the second half of the year, you will get a surprise out of Tesla. And the surprise was you're going to see a bigger COGS reduction. We can pull up some of the shows from last year. You're going to get a bigger COGS reduction than planned. And even though that they're doing price changes, their COGS reduction program is going to exceed the level of price change that's occurring. So they're going to be able to get more price out of the product than the price changes they're doing. And sure enough, they did that in Q4. And I think this is some of the data we should go through now, because there's some confusion based on the commentary of, like, well, the CFO says, well, this is going to be, diminishing and it'd be more difficult to do, and therefore you can't count on this going forward. Well, none of us know what Tesla is going to do in terms of pricing. None of us know what the market dynamics are going to dictate, but I think you can make some educated statements on it, and I can describe what happens from an OEM side, because I do believe Tesla acts more like an electronics manufacturer, which has a lot of my experience and background, than less of like an automaker when it comes to COGS deflation.
Yeah, you're going to walk us through a little bit more, teach us. I want to understand this a little bit more But you have been calling it correctly. Again, one of the lone voices out there, which is very, very refreshing because many of us just listen to the analysts, right? When Gary Black prints out something and we're all like feeling like he's accurate, he's right. And you always kind of try to make sure that, this part you're right, this part you're got to look into a little bit more. And this was one of the charts that came out that proved that you were right. You were basically saying that cost of goods for Tesla is going to show up. Here it is. In Q4, it actually continued to fall. So that's one thing that many of the analysts did not see. So before we get to you explaining a little bit more, I want to play this video of Pierre Ferragu of New Street Research. So I just interviewed Pierre, and I just dropped that video recently. And the interesting about Pierre versus all the other analysts is that he actually does deep dive research. And he actually is repeating what you've been saying for the last couple months, which is, you got to look at Tesla differently than automotive. You just said it just now, right? They're very similar to a like a software on wheels. And so there are still places for them to cut. And that's why you can't just assume that they've hit their bottom. We'll talk about it if you think that there's still more to come in the future, or they pretty well hit their limit, which is what many people believe. But let's listen a little bit to Pierre. I took that clip and I sped it up. I might have sped it up a little too fast, but hopefully this reduces our time to watch this and listen to what he's thinking. So he's different than most analysts.
It's like the gross margin, 16% gross margin. 18 months ago, Tesla was more than 10 points above that on gross margins. And the controversy was whether they could become one day like a sustainable 30% gross margin auto manufacturer. And so when your gross margin is like divided by 2, your profit margin is probably divided by 3. And that's kind of the situation where we are today. So to me, like the key focus is Tesla, a traditional car manufacturer who will end up with gross margins between 15 and 20%, or should we expect them to be a 25 to 30% gross margin business in the long run? And what's very interesting is that this is exactly what the key controversy was, for Apple in the late 2000s, when the mobile phone business was like a 20 to 25% gross margin business with gross margins under pressure, and Apple came up with like an $800 phone, then with like 40% gross margin. And the question had always been, is are they over earning, or are they going to become like any other mobile phone manufacturers, like a low 20s kind of gross margin player? And so that's a key controversy for Tesla. And to me, Tesla is not like an auto manufacturer from that perspective. We make very easily like a big a cognitive mistake by association, which is to be like, that type of gross margin is a type of gross margin you should expect from a car manufacturer. But that's a mistake. The gross margin doesn't depend on what you do. The gross margin depends on your competitive landscape, on your ability to defend pricing, on your ability to control your costs, etc. And when you look at the operating model of Tesla, they are closer to a microelectronics manufacturer than to a car manufacturer. When you look at what a Tesla is made of, like the most important component of a Tesla is a battery pack. And a battery pack is a product that has like 10 years of existence. It didn't exist 10 years ago or 15 years ago, like a battery pack. So it's still a very early product. The way you manufacture it is still very early in the experience curve. So the cost of putting together a battery pack is probably going to continue to come down very significantly for many, many more years. Then inside the battery pack, you have batteries. Well, the unit cost of batteries has been coming down like in teens for years and years and years. And it's still probably coming down, in high single digits today. And then I could go on like that more and more. Like another example, just one last one that comes to my mind, is like Tesla is not like buying seats from suppliers and from like a network and industry in which like the way you do a seat, the way you define what is like an expensive and luxurious seat versus a cheap and uncomfortable seat is all set in stone. Instead of that, Tesla is manufacturing their own seats, and they are innovating a lot in the way they do seats, and they are breaking compromises all the time and making seats like cheaper and more comfortable. So everything Tesla does is very different from what other auto manufacturers are doing. And so the most like overlooked aspect of Tesla is that they're taking costs down very, very rapidly. And when I asked this question on the call yesterday, when I look at the last 5-6 quarters, you've been taking down costs at a pace that is the pace of a microelectronic manufacturer, not a car manufacturer. So is that sustainable? It was interesting to have the answer of Ebar first, the CFO, who was very cautious and like kind of like unwilling to commit too much on Tesla's ability to continue to take down costs. But then when you heard like the rest of the team, one after the other, taking the question and answering, most of them were like, yeah, we feel good about it. We know what we're doing, and we feel closer to microelectronics manufacturers and car manufacturers. And I think that's very important. Because what happened in the last 18 months is that Tesla hit a wall in terms of demand. And that's a wall I didn't anticipate, and nobody really anticipated. So suddenly they realized it was getting difficult to sell this car. So, and when you plan to grow your volumes by 50% per year on average, it's kind of like a tough reality to meet, because you have new fabs, you build them out, you need to get them running, you need to fill them up. And then the only way you can keep growing your volume is to take costs down. And these adjustments that happened over the last 18 months got us where we are today at 16% gross margins.
I'll pause it there. Okay. I love it. This is so important for us Tesla investors to understand. And he mentioned it. So the interesting thing is that you obviously have not only a supply chain expert, you're a manufacturing factory experience, but you grew up in the microelectronic industry. You helped build these, what he was talking about, the app, these mobile phones. And so you know very well what that industry is like. And then Pierre Ferragu happens to be an expert in the semiconductor, the microelectronics industry. So when he saw Tesla, he understood, just like you have, that you look at it not as an auto manufacturer, it's a computer on wheels. And then now you can calculate what's going to happen. So this is, he's basically repeating the stuff you've been saying. So what's your thoughts when you heard what he said?
Yeah, it's number one, it's going to continue. So the question posed to the CFO was built up in a way of like, hey, you've had these massive drawdowns over the last 5 quarters. You're going to be able to continue that. And the natural response is this, this is going to be, more difficult to do. But then the 4, gentlemen stepped up and spoke to their areas and what, they've got plenty more to do. In my experience, the COGS reductions, number one, occur in perpetuity to end of life. We call it EOL, or end of life. You're constantly, and I call out some areas in some of my posts on X, but there's actually probably a half dozen or more various aspects of COGS. COGS is a little complex to explain. It's a little bit of a word salad, cost of goods sold, in all the different areas. But I do I take a shot at some, 2 or 3 areas on X where this will continue to come from, but it will, because number one, they're steady and growing volumes. And that's important in any industry. That means suppliers are allowed to grow too. And if suppliers can grow with their fixed asset base, if they can grow volumes, their cost structure comes down, their efficiencies improve. And what Tesla does is they go back to them as partners and say, hey, look, you're making more money. We want some of that as well. If we can share in this, or we can share in this gain of efficiency and this growth of volumes together, I'm going to be able to give you more volume in the next quarter and the quarter after that. So, and there's so many other reasons too. Tesla doesn't spread their volume over 20 different models. They spread it over, 4 or 5. And I can't tell you how critical that is. Everybody looks at the BYD volume and said, wow, they passed them in Q4. Well, they did that probably across 19 different models. And then you take the models under that, there's probably obviously multiple colors and multiple configurations of those models. So the actual efficiency that suppliers can gain, or the efficiency that they can gain in their own factories, is muted. Remember, COGS comes from a number of different areas. You've got this design or event-driven element, which is basically what Lars and Drew were speaking to, of like, we've got these ideas. We're going to change, we're going to combine these 2 parts. We're going to propose a process deletion in the factory, or, a number of different things, or we're going to take this spec down because suppliers don't need to meet this spec. This part has never failed. This test has never caused a problem for us. So let's remove it from the supplier. Let's remove it from the gigafactory. And all these things happen continuously, nonstop. So you have event-driven from design. You've got event and process efficiencies driven things that come from Tom Zhu and the Gigafactory team. So there's engineers crawling all over the Gigafactories that report to Tom Zhu. They're responsible for design, process, maintenance, and so forth in the Gigafactory. They come up with ideas all the time. Hey, I can speed up this robot from here to here, take the station efficiency from here to here, and therefore I can pull this one robot off the line as a result. This happens non-stop. So you have design, you've got the factory, Gigafactory side of it, and then you've got the supplier side of it, which were two of the leaders that stepped up on the call, on the earnings call, talked about packaging efficiency. They talked about just a number of things they're doing with logistics, or a number of things they can go one of the gentlemen talked about forward leveraging new product designs and then driving COGS reductions today. I've been talking about this till I've been blue in the face. This is what you do. They've got the number one volume product. They have the prize. They have, this is the prom queen. Tesla is the prom queen in the auto industry. And when you say that you're going to build something that's going to be 2 to 5 times that in volume, guess what? It's not only like you're an existing supplier today and you want that business. If you don't get that business, you're probably going to die. Like you're going to fall off the map, or you're going to go back to your board and say, hey, look, we know we got the Model Y business, but on the new car, we didn't get it. And the board would be like, well, wait, what provisions can we give? What else can we do? These companies are competing and fighting like tooth and nail. I could see going from 3 to Y. There could have been some trepidation from suppliers of like, hey, is Tesla really going to do it? And then they did it with the Model Y, and the volumes have gone through the roof. So now Tesla is they're the coveted player. They went. It's so ironic. Back 10, 12 years ago, suppliers didn't even want to work with them, because guess what? If you put effort towards working with this startup and the startup failed as a supplier, you could lose all your money in that investment. And now it's literally the polar opposite, where you get an award on the Model Y, or you get an award on the Compact, you get the biggest automobile award in the world. And that is worth a lot. So that allows them to dual and triple source per part. It allows new competitive suppliers to come in and bid. It allows suppliers that were regional to now grow and be global players. And therefore Tesla gets some of that as well. So, I mean, the possibilities are endless, but you got the design, the event-driven things from design. You've got Tom Zhu, event-driven and process-driven efficiencies. You got the supply chain, what I just talked about, forward leveraging new products. But also, again, Tesla volumes are growing. So the two supply chain leads are going to their supply base and say, look, my volumes a year ago were here, and now they're here. You had these efficiencies. We want to share in that. And every quarter, there should be some efficiencies that come back. Some suppliers, maybe it takes 6 months, but usually every quarter you're going to a set of suppliers and you're getting some reductions back from them. That will continue. That's not going to stop. And so when you put all those things together, and then Tesla still has a number of decisions they could be making on features, they could be making on things in the car. When you see them make these decisions around the charging cable in or out, these are all things relating around, these are feature, trade-off decisions they're making for the vehicle. And then you've got those are all physical things that are in the car. Then you've got the non-physical things that are not in the vehicle that ships with you. Sometimes there's consumables that are used in the factory. Sometimes, there's the logistics costs that you don't necessarily see as a consumer, both inbound and outbound. And there's all kinds of efficiencies. And by the way, there's also risks associated with each of these areas too. You could make a change and you can cause a bigger problem somewhere else. Or in the case of the Red Sea, there's disruption right now in the Red Sea. So there's some risk on the logistics side as well. But that's where the long-term contracts come in. And then finally, and this doesn't get talked about a lot, so there's something called network design or network latency as it relates to building a supply chain and what it means to COGS. And all I'll say about Tesla is, if you look at the process time in the factory, and then you look at the amount of inventory that's in channel, you have industry-leading inventory that's in channel, meaning they have the least amount of inventory. They have 15 days. It went from 60. We actually reduced in Q4. It went from 16 to 15 days. And then you've got the speed at which the product flows through the factory. When you couple those two things together, basically they're able to accelerate COGS changes through the factory and through their whole network all the way out to the consumer much, much faster. That same network at GM, well, right now for any legacy EV, that same network is about a half year. It's about 6 months. And Tesla's got that whole thing running at probably, south of, 30 days with logistics, probably south of 25 days with logistics. So if you just compare those two, and so when GM or Ford comes up with an idea, maybe 6 months later it's in a vehicle, maybe longer, and in Tesla it could be a matter of days. And then that's one of the other big drivers that allows Tesla to take COGS down much more rapidly than others.
Okay, wow, that was amazing, Jeff. Thank you so much.
By the way, there's another half dozen reasons too,
I
Herbert.
know.
I could keep going.
And I know that's why I think people need to follow you on X, because you are, much more precise about all of this reason. So the big takeaway, I think, which is pretty shocking for me, that you are willing to step up and say things like this, which is that you believe that it's going to continue. The cost of goods will continue to lower down. Just no one else believes this except for you, and I'm going to listen to you. So you saying here, I believe Tesla will continue cutting prices, but also cutting cost of goods at a commensurate or even higher rate than the price cuts. Keep in mind, they'll want some MSRP separation with a $25,000 vehicle, so they won't let the 3 and Y fall too much. So you're saying, yeah, I just can't see them cutting the price too low. These hunks of metal and thousands of components still cost $36,300 blended. Cost reduction efforts relative to product life cycle are far from over. If you've ever done this before, you would know. Not easy, but also in capable hands based on past performance. So that's a big call on your part, because it's hard for people to believe that they've already cut the cost for Model 3 by 30% in the last 3 years, and they're going to continue to even continue. And you've walked through a bunch of reasons why that is. And then I just want to show people, this is the kind of stuff that you post on X. I mean, you talked a little bit about this, which is the new product leverage. You talked about how suppliers, they are now wanting to not only take advantage of the Model 3 and Y that they're already supplying Tesla, but they're already seeing that when that 25,000 model comes out, their volume's going to just skyrocket. They're going to be able to, negotiate lower prices for their supplies for the Model 3 and Y. Name another OEM that will produce a single model that would replace the Model Y volume. That's like, I think you pointed out before, right? Tesla's the only company you've ever seen where every new product that they release actually is sold more than the previous ones. And so suppliers go, oh crap, I better give you my best, lowest price now, because I want to be selected for the growth of this versus other companies. And then the other part that you talk about, again, I'm not going to read all this, but you talk about the culture. This is a unique company. They really focus on this. Thoughts on
I've never seen. I've worked for many CEOs. I've worked in mega cap tech too, and they're all great for some reason. They all have strengths and weaknesses, but I've never seen a CEO this focused on cost structure and knowing it down to the laws of physics in many respects, knowing that there's a separation between the raw material cost that you're dealing with and then the conversion of that raw material into its final spot in the vehicle, and the distance between those two, and how you should actually minimize that conversion cost rapidly, and it should really decline rapidly over time. There's very few that understand that. There's very few that understand what design for manufacturability really is. This is what I teach other companies of, like, how do you do DFX to drive a more predictable and your lowest cost structure? How do you eliminate waste? How these whole things you hear them saying, the best part is no part, the best process is no process. That is very unique and rare. And then it permeates down to his leadership team, and then the teams below them. They actually work as a functional unit. They don't just all, they all report into various different groups, but at the end of the day, there's a team that's working on a sub $1,000 electric motor, and that whole team is one unit that works together to deliver that, and they're all kind of going through the trade-offs together. So it's very special. But if I could summarize, I do think there's more to go. It's going to be lumpy. Next quarter, I think it would be great if Tesla again reported sequential increase in gross margins. Maybe it's going to be flat. COGS is very difficult to predict. They may not. They may have. They may do a tick down in gross margin. I don't know, for the next quarter. But this is why you look at these things over like 4 and 5 quarter increments, and what you see as a pattern from Tesla. Even if you look at this over 2 years, there was a big disruption, and we can put this chart out later. when Austin and Berlin were turned on, they were a huge drag on COGS. But what you saw before it and what you've seen after that is them doing successive 4-quarter increments of 8 to 10% COGS reductions, which tells you that they have a system, they have an approach to doing this. And you could have, Model 3's been around for, and now we're on the refresh, but, for 6 years. 3 years ago, you could have said, well, how much more are they going to do? They've been reducing COGS for 3 years. The answer is 3 more years of COGS reductions is what they've been able to do. So for folks to think that this just comes to a stop here, that's not the case. There will be variation. Do I think that they can do 8 to 10% over the next year? Yes. Could there be low side risk of, I'm talking COGS reduction. Could there be low side risk to 6%? Maybe. Something could happen. There could be a disruption. You never know. Could they overshoot the 10% and do 12%? Possibly. So this is very difficult to predict, but it sounds like they're loaded with a number of ideas. They've got the volume leverage in market. They've got the right people. They're not worried about breaking open the vehicle and making a change and doing it rapidly and getting it into the line. They've got the fastest supply chain to introduce and flush those changes through. Remember, you're flushing the old material out quickly too, as well as ushering in the new lower cost process or part. So it's not just you get the change in fast, but you're getting the old higher cost material out too. So they have all these things kind of working together for them. So to me, logically, I believe that this COGS reduction program is going to continue. It's going to be lumpy. It's going to be unpredictable. Final thing I'll say is, I started off that joke with, the Pavlov's dog's response and how just every time you hear the word, some analysts hear the word price cut, they immediately have a conditioned response versus the whole point was do the rest of the math around COGS. There's people out here that can help. They're not bad analysts. They're not bad people. They're trying to do the right thing. But again, I think there's more nuance to this. And I think there's a couple that are getting it right. And all I'll say is that I would continue to kind of have a more holistic approach to these areas. By the way, I'll be the first person, if Tesla cuts prices 5% across the board in every single model tomorrow, I'll be saying, well, that's going to be a tough quarter then on gross margins. I'll be the first person to say that. But it's really important to look at both sides, the pricing and the supply side.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. And I think that it's, you need to look at Tesla different than an automaker. I like the way you position it. It's closer to the microelectronics industry than it is in the auto industry.
Here, yeah,
and that's just something we need to keep in mind. That's why people who were betting on Apple, they didn't bet right because they thought of it as a phone instead of being this a software-based kind of a thing. Thank you so much, Jeff. That was fantastic. I appreciate this. That's why we're very lucky to have you here, explain the details to us and walking us through. And then we're watching everything you say play out. It's fascinating for me. Thank you so much, Jeff. Follow him on X if you want to see this in much more detail. He does incredible long-form posts to explain this to you. Follow him on X at the Jeff Lutz. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Herbert. Thanks for surfacing all this.
I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.